Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to this panel session. And I'm happy and glad to be moderating this panel session. So to start, our panel is titled Agricultural Transformation Requires a Stronger Focus on Justice for Vulnerable Farmers. And this event is hosted by the University of Leeds, the CGIAR Initiative on Climate Resilience CLIMBA, CARE International, International Rice Research Institute, and Alliance of Biodiversity and SEAT, featuring Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives in Kenya, and the University of Gambia. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening, we are here to discuss agricultural transformation. I suppose that we have heard the word transformation over and over. Transformation has become a catchphrase. Transformation here, transformation there, but what is transformation? In our research unit in the University of Leeds, we say that transformation without justice is not transformation. So tonight, I am here to discuss the issue of agricultural transformation together with colleagues or senior researchers and experts in the agriculture sector. Joining us is Madame Elizabeth Edem Yaba Akaba. She is a farmer and a representative of the Tuba Women Farmers Association from Ghana. And we are also joined by Madame Veronica Ndetu. She is the coordinator of Climate Change Unit of the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperative, Kenya. We are also joined by John Helen. He is the co-lead and social equity lead of the CGIAR Initiative on Climate Resilience and CLIMBA. We are here again, joined by Joy. Pardon me if I shorten your name, Joy Das. He is a senior program coordinator in humanitarian and resilience at CARE International in Bangladesh. Lastly, I introduce Omar Sambo. He is a lecturer at the University of Gambia and a climate change negotiator for the government of Gambia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those colleagues online, friends, family from University of Leeds, CGIAR, we are trying as much as possible to make this session interactive. So to engage you in our panel section, we want you to participate in this Slido. And the question is a just agricultural transformation possible? So colleagues online would want you to participate. Can you provide answers to this question? Oh, so we've got yes. Interesting results popping up. I don't know. No. Yes, 67% so far. Oh. Yes, if you are joining us online, family from Leeds, CGIAR, Ghana, wherever you are, you would like to participate in this poll as well. It's interesting, so we're going to see whether just agricultural transformation is possible from our panel discussion later. Okay, thank you very much. I would want to move on to today's presentation. As I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, agricultural transformation has become relevant because of the need to transform in view of the current climate change situation. Now, when we talk about justice in agricultural transformation, my research unit defines justice from three main dimensions. We're saying that justice ought to be distributional, it ought to be representational, and it ought to be historically based just transformation. When I say distributional, we are talking about resources in agricultural sector. We're talking about seed, we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about a lot of resources that are relevant to transform agricultural sector. But is these resources discussed in a framework where everyone, region, and even including biological beings like animals and plants are discussed within this framework? So we took this idea to interrogate the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture. I suppose that most of you have heard about Koronivia, but sometimes when I mention Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture, some people said, what is Koronivia? Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture is a formal decision taken by the UNFCCC in 2017 at the 23rd COP to formally integrate agriculture into the UNFCCC system. Now, I'd like to tell that agriculture has been discussed overly in the UNFCCC system, but this is a formal decision to have a document, to have a reference point, to say this is a document that we can all refer to as a global community when it comes to issues of agriculture. Now, in the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture, a joint work group was formulated from different countries, which we call in the UN system parties, and then other observers from different groups and constituencies were also part of the joint work process, and they developed a roadmap. Ladies and gentlemen, the roadmap was the decision was supposed to be submitted last year, but we know how our global situation or the COVID situation went, so the idea is to submit a decision this year. We do not know the outcome. Maybe we may hear something from here, or we don't. Thank you. So in our research, we collected submitted documents, videos from the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture and analyzed the data. I'll briefly rush through our results, bringing out the gaps in distributional justice. We admit that the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture discuss issues when it comes to distribution of resources. However, we are saying that little explicit recognition of geographic distribution of responsibility for agriculture emission. Who is responsible? This aspect has not been very clear in the joint works process. Again, it is obvious that issues about gender, men, indigenous community, market has been discussed over and over. However, we have seen that there is a gap in terms of the discussion of risk. What does it mean if we integrate markets? What will be the outcome? Who will be disadvantaged in the process? We think this has not been highlighted. Representational justice, yes. In the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture, we've seen massive representation of groups, submission of documents from different groups, observers, parties, and so on. However, again, we have observed that different voices have been presented, but however, when it comes to the implementation and the governance, who will be the lead? Who will take the lead in terms of implementation of these different voices? It's something that ought to be discussed in the Koronivia Joint Work process. Now, I end my presentation by looking at how we analyze historical justice. We still think that in the Koronivia Joint Work process, topics like land grabbing, decent work, slavery, issues that are connected to the age-old historical antecedents of agricultural transformation has not been dealt with. So if a decision is passed, we are looking forward to seeing that issues about land grabbing, dispossession of land, or decent work, we seek these sort of issues to be addressed as well in the Koronivia Joint Work process. Now, we conclude by saying that there is a need for the joint work or the Koronivia discussion to continue so that some of these gaps that we have identified will be addressed to foster just transformation in our agricultural food system, an agricultural development process. At this point, I'd like to say that colleagues joining us online, you can participate in this panel session by contributing or posting your questions online in the Q&A session. And to move on to our next session, we have this question. Who are the main actors responsible for creating a socially equitable and, just agricultural transformation? You can select as many as apply. Do you think it is the responsibility of the government, the private sector, the international agencies, research organizations, or the farming communities? Interesting. Government, 100%. So it means that we've all accepted or have come to a consensus that the government is supposed to take the lead in bringing about a just transformation in agricultural sector. Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for participating in this small poll. At least we are seeing the trend, and this picture gives us an idea of whom everyone is looking onto to drive the change or bring about just transformation. Now we move on to our next panel section, is to discuss Great. Okay, so this poll will remain here for that purpose. So now I invite my senior colleagues and experts to join me upstage as we discuss issues about transformation. Thank you. Please, shall we give them a round of applause? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And thanks for accepting to participate in this panel session to discuss issues on agricultural transformation and justice. I'd like to start with Madame Veronica. Madame Veronica, please, could you tell us about the latest progress on Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture?
Hello. Hello. I am not sure that I'll be talking about the latest outcome for the Koronivia Joint Work on agriculture, considering that the work is still ongoing. In fact, at 8, we are going back to the negotiation room. And so then that means that discussions are not over. However, I think what is important here is that discussions have gone on up to the last COP, whereby the discussions were about the topics of the Koronivia Joint Work on Agriculture Roadmap, and that came up to conclusion, and workshop reports have been generated from these discussions, and those are available in the UNFCCC website. What remains currently is the agreements on the way forward. What is the future for Koronivia within the UNFCCC? And now that is the elephant in the room. It is still under discussion. I wouldn't be able to say exactly the latest outcome until after when we finish midnight today. Yeah, but I would be able to talk about the topics that have been discussed before. Thank you.
The next question, I'd like to move to Mr. Oman. Are you optimistic? I think you have also been participating in the Koronivia process and the negotiation process. Are you optimistic about the future of agriculture in the UNFCCC?
Thank you very much. Just like you mentioned earlier on, soon after we have agriculture as a negotiation item, I think a lot of progress is also getting on. in as much as we would consider the pace to be very slow. And like she mentioned, the way forward is still something I don't want to preempt. But I am very confident that so long the engagements are going on and parties are engaging meaningfully, at the end of the day, I expect that there will be some progressive results coming out, and then the future definitely is steering towards the transformation that we all seek. So what really is happening now is that having parties to come to consensus, and those processes are never going to be easy because, there is no, uniformity in terms of the complexities among nations. And so long there is no uniformity in the problems that we face, there would still be challenges in coming to consensus. But progressively the documents are, and I believe that because of the progressive nature of the documents and the text being developed, there would be some positive outcomes, in my view, come the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. Now I move to Mr. Mr. Das. Pardon me. So, in your opinion, what does a just agricultural transformation mean to you?
Thank you, Rebecca. So, let me start with the core philosophy of CGIAR's climate justice. Okay. To us, climate justice is a future where men, women, indigenous people will have a situation where they can have the significantly better well-being, and they can exercise their human rights, as well as the inequality is removed. And of course, in a temperature in a global in an earth where the temperature is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius rise, and of course from a gender transformative agricultural point of view, it's not only about dealing with the food security or nutrition perspective. It's also about how we deal with the societal and gender inequalities in the world. Because we believe that the societal challenges and inequalities are equally responsible for the problems we are facing. It's not only about the climate change itself. It's not only the physical science of the climate change, the social science, which is very important for us when we start thinking that we are going to deal with the, say, food security or food supply, nutrition, anything. So, essentially, it's about dealing with one central thing, that is gender relations to us. And while we want to ensure that women, men, and especially marginalized indigenous group, they have the right to their lands, access to services, and access to finances. So that's what we interpret transformational climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the response. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Helen. You work in the CGIAR CGIAR project. What does just agricultural transformation mean to you?
Thanks, Rebecca. I think it comes back to your opening remark when you were talking about transformation and justice. And the driver of the research initiative that I co-lead is on transformative adaptation. And the IPCC recently used a slightly different but similar term, transformational adaptation. And it's really looking at the root causes and addressing the root causes of vulnerability in the context of climate change. And if you're genuinely going to tackle the root causes of vulnerability, then that raises issues of power and inequality. And the research project I'm engaged with is very much looking at that issue. What are the drivers of vulnerability? And also something you mentioned, that often within transformation, the potential to exacerbate inequalities has not been given sufficient attention. What one has to be aware of is the danger of climate change adaptation making life more difficult, making some groups of people even more vulnerable. That includes women, youth, and it also introduces areas around ethnicity, caste, disability. So it is embracing and not shying away from the fact that a climate change adaptation response is going to involve issues around power and inequality. and we shouldn't shirk away from tackling those head on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Edem, you've been part of the women and leading them in the tuber irrigation project, and I know that place very well. It's not an easy agroecological zone with so many challenges, peri-urban land contestation, some people coming to take over farmers' land and so on. How are you dealing with this issue and fairness in leading women in the agriculture sector in the tuber irrigation project area?
Right. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And then thank you for your question too. I've been so passionate about this. First of all, I would like to say, with women, we've not been fair enough with ourselves. We have to be loud. There should be publicity. We have to sell ourselves. So what I'm doing at the moment is to build capacity of women. They should start selling themselves. If I say they should start selling themselves, what do I mean? We are working, and then working for money into our pockets, as the men are also doing. But no one is hearing of us. Even when the woman works, when the woman acquires a land, they think it's for the husband. This time around, we are saying no, 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 no. We also we also want to possess our own land. We want to possess our own resources. The inputs belong to us. The finances belong to us. The bank accounts belong to us. That is what I'm teaching our women farmers at the moment.
Thank you very much. That's very impressive. Thank you. Women have not been fair enough. Now, Madam Veronica, I come back to you. You watched my presentation. My question A is, do you have any critique about it? Do you accept all that we have found? It's just brief. It was very fast anyway. But do you accept that there are gaps in terms of justice? If yes, what do we do to integrate just transformation into the Koronivia Joint Work process? Because, as you've rightly said, there is space, or yes, we have one aspect, there's a decision, a document, but we are discussing future aspects or future issues. What would you say about my presentation? If there is justice, or if these gaps are real, what should be done in integrating justice?
I don't want to be unfair to you, and I don't also want to be unfair to myself, because and my fellow colleagues in the Koronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. But I would say it's two-way. It is yes and no. I will justify the yes in the sense, I will justify the fact that there is some level of consideration of just transformation in the Koronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. If you go through the topics that have been discussed, the reports that I said earlier are in the UNFCCC website, you will find that walking through all the topics or all the reports under discussion, we'll find that one of the key issues that, in fact, even as Koronivia started, it considers the vulnerabilities of the agriculture sector to the impacts of climate change, but also looking at the crucial role played by farmers, youth and local communities, and indigenous people. This to me is looking at inclusivity. It looks at gender considerations, as she has said. It may not have unpacked the issues, but of course, when we go to implementation, then this is when the issues need to be packed. Because as we say, each country, each even local community has its own special circumstances. And these things cannot be all contained in the Koronivia discussions at the global level. But when we go to the implementation, these are the things that need to be considered, so that we will be looking at what does it mean inclusion of women, youth, and other vulnerable groups. What does it mean to do gender consideration? There are also issues like things like the food systems are mentioned in some of those reports, looking at the whole system instead of looking at certain aspects of the agriculture. You will also find there is sustainable management, which is actually inclusive of looking at all the aspects of production, looking at what are the available inputs that are required. There is the issue of looking at also soil management and also land management, including even water management. So for me, these things are really contained in these reports. There may be a few things that may not be within, though they may not be explicitly said in the reports that we have. But then for me, that these are things that need to be packed. There are things you have talked about, like the historical injustices. Those are not really technical topics, and they may not find their way in the Koronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. But of course, as I have said, as we consider implementation, it is necessary that all the actors, the countries, the people, the stakeholders that in these countries, we all need to go and unpack the reports that emanate from the Koronivia Joint Work on Agriculture. Then ask ourselves, how do we do it in a just way? So that is the way I would answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Veronica, for that answer. I think that you've given the light out to parties to now, or you've shed the light on the part for parties to know that our research also has given an expose on the nitty-gritties of what should be considered as well. Because when we talk about justice, the decent work and so on, they are laborers in the agricultural sector. So we need to look at this frame as a whole. Thank you. Now I come to Mr. Umar. Your question is, what improvement would you like to see in the next phase of negotiations on agriculture?
Thank you very much. But quickly, just to mention, like she said, some things are not explicitly mentioned, in as much as I appreciate the work that you do, and we learn from each other, and we would learn from it as well, is that, when you looking at things from a global context, it's difficult to just pick from a point. So therefore, you need to develop a text that represents the entire world. And in the implementation phase is where you look at specifics. And some of those things might not be explicit in the text, but of course, in the language, you can feel them in there. That's my view. But yeah, like I said earlier on, I wouldn't want to preempt what the future holds, but generally, I think the documents are progressive in nature. Now, the progressiveness of these documents will take us to the next level when we get to implementation. Now, implementation, for me, would require state specifics, and of course, jurisdiction specifics as well. But in doing so, parties definitely need to engage to ensure that the text being developed is representative of all. And I think that is basically what we are doing at the moment. So by the end of the day, we believe that there would be a more progressive document representative of all parties, wherein implementation will be very feasible and applicable to all nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I am tempted to ask a follow-up question, but I get the conviction that someone has a follow-up question for you. So during Q&A, you get my rebuttal from my colleagues. So now, Mr. Das, my question to you is, when it comes to justice, how do you see yourself implementing justice in your field of work?
Well,
Because initially you explained how justice
yeah.
in your work, but now we are talking about transformation and organization are into transformation. So how do you go about implementing transformation in your work now?
Yeah, I did. I did talk about justice, and I especially emphasized that we work in a way that we address the gender-related power relations. So it's easy to talk about this, but it's difficult, because it's sort of entrenched in our society, in sometimes you can say in our genetics. But however, in doing so, we are fully aware that when you talk about gender relations, gender power relations, there cannot be any solution that you do it standalone for women only. And by separating them, designing separate or activities, separate plan for them, because that has the risk that their work burden, which they are already overstressed, right? They worked at least 1.5 times more than men. Yeah. So, if you design separate activities for them, it's going to overstress them, right? So we do it in a way so that it's, we take a couple of steps. To start with, we do GCVCA, that is Gender-Based Climate Vulnerability and Capacity Assessment. And through that, of course, we frame a climate adaptation plan, but especially what we do is a gender action plan. So that through that gender action plan, we can frame an agreed gender division of role in the family, in the society, where we enable women with more role in farming, but at the same time we ensure their work burden is shared by the men in the family. So that's the core of it. So in terms of other technical approaches, of course, we have an approach known as super approach, which stands for sustainable, profitable, equitable, and resilient climate agricultural practice. This is an adaptation practice, but the focus is on women's empowerment as well as empowering indigenous people. So, and in terms of tools and techniques, like many other organizations, we have Farmers Field Business School, and where we train farmers with different, and equip them with different tolerant varieties. It could be flood tolerant, saline tolerant, heat tolerant varieties, and as well as technologies and techniques. And at the same time, we ensure that they have the climate information services required from both public and private services, because that's very, very, very important. And we do try to provide customized climate information services for our farmer groups, especially women and indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, John, I come back to you. How are you integrating justice? Because you defined justice to us earlier on. So how are you integrating justice in your research and in your projects in the climber?
Thanks. Very good question, Rebecca. One of the two ways of looking at this. First of all, there's the ensuring that it's embedded within the project amongst the researchers in climber, because issues around transformative adaptation, social equity, women's empowerment, justice aren't necessarily ideas that resonate with every single member of a research for development team. So it's having the whole justice angle as a cross-cutting theme, showing how it doesn't undermine the raison d'etre of each and every person working as a scientist in that team. It adds value to what they're seeking to do, because they're not doing the research for the sake of research. They're doing it in order to have beneficial outcomes and impacts. So the argument is, by having this justice focus, there is greater chance of the beneficial outcomes and impacts. There's also the external audience, because we are not working as researchers in a hermetically sealed environment. We have very strong partnerships with private sector, with government, basically all those stakeholders who appeared in your poll that was projected. And it's a similar thing of stressing time again and learning from people those importances of justice. Things that in 20 years' time we'll probably look back and think, how could we have actually not had that uppermost? In a similar way of any social change, you look back and think, how is it that we could have had societies where women didn't have the vote, but there were struggles to get women the vote, and now it's a given in many parts, not all parts of the world. So it's having it forefront in our agendas, and showing that it is critical to meeting the outcomes and impacts that we're all involved in working towards. And I believe everyone working in these research projects is committed and focused on the same outcomes and impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam, you mentioned something interesting. You are driving women to show forth. So can you give us examples of projects or activities that Tuba Irrigation Women Association are engaging in? And also you can mention your wider participation in the Accra project as well.
Tuba Women's Association, as I said earlier on, I don't know if you have been saying it, that if your husband is alive, you can't acquire a land unless your husband passes on. But with this initiative, individual women are acquiring lands at Tuba. At least if you don't get the full plot of 3 acres, you are given half of it. So I think it's okay. It's a gradual process. And then with the finances, since most of them have started working, they are keeping their own finances. They are opening accounts. They are keeping their own money. And I think that's a plus.
Thank you.
And then also when it comes to inputs, resources, and all that, formally they have to rely on the men. But now, at least they are acquiring their own things through the knowledge that ICRA has come to give to the group. ICRA has helped so much by building the capacity of women in Tuba irrigation. We have climate change issues at the moment, and they've come to teach them what to do. Applying biopesticides, mulching in order to retain water in the soil, and then what have you. At least it is helping. But the only major issue is our cultural beliefs. That is what is hindering us. And by and by, we'll surely overcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we come to our audience. Please, you've heard them. And, oh. Okay, so we have our last Q&A here. What will the panel consider a positive outcome from the Koronivia process? This is an open session, so I didn't give any option, so you can type your suggestion. And is loss and damage the right mechanism for promoting just transformation under the UNFCCC process? I think my panelists have, so we don't move, it's okay, I'll read them out. Does Koronivia and broader UNFCCC negotiation represent a just and equitable process? Do we need more just process in order to achieve a just transformation? I think I'll leave the last one out. So we reflect on this question, and then rather I'd want to give the opportunity to colleagues here. And then if we have any question online, would want to also read them out. So please, the floor is open. Do you have any question regarding Koronivia? Do you think that just transformation in agriculture sector is possible? With the discussion they had with us, I think they seem to be giving, I would say, flagging some issues. But what's your opinion? You can raise your hand if you have a question, and then we'll pass the microphone around. So there's a hand here.
Thank you very much, the panelists, for this very engaging discussion. I just have a question for you regarding the women engagement and on land registration and land certification. I think it's very interesting, and within the African context, you mentioned the cultural barriers that you face. I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that and what strategies you're putting in place to overcome those challenges, because that's a big part of the problem within our patriarchal cultural system for land certification and registration. Thank you.
Thank you. So we take, Madam, you note the question down. Let's take the question and we'll come back. So we have one hand here.
Hi. I have heard that Europe often stresses as a paradigm for agriculture the organic style of agricultural production. Do you believe that organic agriculture, in the way that Europe presents as a paradigm and the protocol for the future, is the right way for the development of a just agriculture in Africa, or should we look for a different model?
Is that question directed towards John?
Yes, to John.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay.
Thank you. No, I just have a quick question. Is this part belong? Yeah.
That's all. You can direct that to
me. Okay. No, I'm just wondering about the definition of a just agricultural transformation, how you came up with that, or how your group came up with that, because it's interesting to follow. But maybe I missed that at the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I shall address that one as well. Okay, so we take responses for this round, and then later on we'll come back to the audience again. So, Madam Edem, they said, what are the cultural challenges?
Sir, thanks so much for your question. What I mean by the cultural challenges, the people belong to a particular religion and a culture, and it's an olden something. It's an olden day something. Back when their forefathers were alive. And they have to put it aside. But they are still practicing it. Let me assume this is tuber irrigation. And we have our normal general meetings. Men will have to sit in front, and women will sit behind. And they might not even hear whatever is going on. And you are not supposed to contribute. If you have a problem, you shut up your mouth. You can't contribute. So that is what I mean by the cultural issues over there.
Thank you very much. So you pass the microphone to John.
Right. Yes. Interestingly, the first time we had a separate women's meeting was when ICRA came into existence. That was the first time we had meetings with the women separately. And then gradually, we are educating them. We are empowering them. So we believe that gradually we will overcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm getting to the tail end of my career, I've spent a lot of time working in the CGIAR, which has been one of the drivers of the Green Revolution. I also work for 2 NGOs. And one of the things I have struggled with in the whole debate over whether the Green Revolution was good or bad is that those debates become very, very polarized. Everything's black and white. Same with GM, discussions over GM. Same with politics, as we see in many countries, growth of populism. In many circumstances, there is a fundamental role for the high-tech, high-input green revolution like agriculture. But there's also the scope for a mosaic. That doesn't preclude organic agriculture, more agroecological ways of growing food. And therefore, I wouldn't want to suggest that a European organic model is the way forward for African agriculture, nor would I want to suggest that what's normally associated with the research institutes that I work with, that Green Revolution approach, is the one for Africa. So whether it's a Bill Gates supporting agra or NGOs pushing agroecology, I really genuinely don't see why you can't have a mosaic of approaches which are fit with the socio-ecological and the agroecological conditions that you're facing. And those mosaics exist. I just sometimes think that we tend to see things in very black and white terms. So by all means, organic in some situations, and perhaps if you're a true commercial farmer and you want to buy inputs and use fertilizer and herbicides, there's a role for that as well. It's not for me or others to dictate the types of farming systems that different types of farmers should be pursuing anywhere in the world, including Africa.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, so I will also respond to the question on how we came about justice. So in our research, we're saying justice is when we look at justice in terms of 3 main dimensions: distributional justice, and then representational justice and historical justice. Of course, there are different dimensions or meanings of justice. Some would call it generational justice. Some even there are different dimensions. But then we looked at it from these 3 main perspectives because of the context that we want to analyze, agriculture policy. So in the Koronivia Joint Work process, we use that as an example or the case to see how distribution of resources, knowledge, technological transfer, as John has just mentioned, and also analyze historical justice. How has the working group even reflected on the frameworks, the agricultural model? And I think Veronica has mentioned that in the joint work process, different groups came in to say, we want agroecology, we want organic agriculture, we want this. These frameworks were all discussed. But we are saying, have they reflected on, at the end of the day, have you analyzed whether we go plant-based diet, what will be the risks? And I appreciate the response John gave. If we all go towards plant-based diet, let us think as a community, as a global community, what will be the risks in terms of even the resilience of agricultural systems? So there is scope for us to think about justice if we are talking about even agricultural models in our new agricultural transformation document, which is now still under consideration. Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. So do we still have any question from the audience? And how about online? Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that. I thought it was part of the Slido. So from our audience, we have a question here. So please, there is no, I don't think they have mentioned a specific, but I have seen Koronivia here, so I shall distribute it for Omar and then Madame Veronica. What would the panel consider a positive outcome from the Koronivia process? And then, is loss and damage the right mechanism for promoting just transformation under the UNFCCC process? Omar, or you can respond to that, but Madame Veronica, you can respond to the first question. Yeah. I also called him.
Thank you. Yes. What would be the what do I consider to be positive outcome from the Koronivia process? I think what we are discussing is implementation. There has been a lot of discussions around what needs to be done. So now it is time to do it. And so what I would consider a positive outcome is when we are going to come up with an agreement, a decision, a COP decision on how the outcomes of the workshops discussed under Koronivia are going to be implemented. And that is, of course, that requires finances. It requires capacities of the implementers, including the farmers. And it also requires the technological kind of inputs. And so this agreement or this decision needs to be able to come up with how is then implementation going to be supported. The next thing is, of course, as we implement, because as I said earlier, these issues are not exhaustive. What has been discussed is not exhaustive. A lot of things keep on coming up. And so when we discuss the future of Koronivia, we are looking at how does the two bodies, the subsidiary bodies, that is the SABSA and SBI, continue engaging so that we still continue getting the science that informs us what needs to be done, because the climate continues changing and we need more updated technologies. New issues are coming up. And so the continuation of these discussions within the UNFCCC are meant to have the science inform the implementation so that then this can continue. So for me, a positive outcome is when we are going to have a decision to how are we going to implement Koronivia and what is the future of Koronivia in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. So, Mr. Uma, do you want to respond to the first one, or loss and damage? And also, afterwards, I pass the microphone to Das, who wants to also respond to loss and damage, the issue on loss and damage.
All right, thank you very much. I think I want to agree with her entirely on the Koronivia. And having said that, let's look at the loss and damage. I wouldn't take that as a country position, but my personal opinion, and which is informed by some discussions with some scientists around that. I do not believe that loss and damage really is the right mechanism, based on different scientific opinions and as well personal opinions on the fact that reparations, what to be exact do we want? That in my view is not well defined as per what to be exact we want. I think there should be more into looking at building the resilience and adaptive capacities of countries than putting a lot of focus on loss and damage as a mechanism. But how do we go about implementing things around this as a mechanism? That's also something that I keep thinking, that how feasible is it? So those questions still linger in my mind, and I do not have enough answers to them. Therefore, I do not believe that this is the right mechanism to go into it. However, I think conversations around it are very relevant, and if they are not going to be put into different pots in terms of financial mechanisms of how to help nations build their resilience and how to respond to loss and damages, I still do not believe they should be separate from adaptation mechanisms that are going to be put in place for nations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Das, it's one of the issues we raised in our policy brief that loss and damage is missing in the Koronivia discussion. Do you also agree with this question?
Yes, it is missing. So this is also my view and also my organization's view, not necessarily the country where I belong to. But yes, loss and damage cannot be a process to of transformation under UNFCCC. Actually, loss and damage funding mechanism is being needed because we have not been able to deliver transformative adaptation, not only in agriculture, also other sectors. So loss and damage is required. This funding mechanism is required. I'd like to politely differ with you. So this funding mechanism is certainly required because we have not been able to mitigate and adapt enough and not in a transformative way. That is why it is required. So this is a tool to deliver climate justice, but we certainly do not want that we will resort to loss and damage funding mechanism to deliver climate justice. So if we can adapt adequately and mitigate at the fullest scale, I'm sure that loss and damage will be minimum, and then we don't have to resort to that. But as long as we cannot do that, we will have to have that tool. So that's my position.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to respond to any of the questions on the board? Okay. Okay, Veronica wants to say something about this.
I don't know. I want to say something about the loss and damage and justice, because I agree with him that it's not loss and damage that is going to address justice, transformation or justice. It is that plus even the adaptation part of it. Loss and damage comes about when the adaptation mechanisms are no longer working. Okay. And so you have catastrophic impacts where maybe people have been displaced, lives have been lost. And that is not necessarily an issue of maybe those that are disadvantaged in the society. It may affect a whole community irrespective of who is better off than the other. So I think much as it is an aspect that would also be, because the most vulnerable may be the ones that may lose, may need to be compensated for some losses when disasters come. But then, like he has said, you need to adapt people. People need to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so you need to look at where are the injustices as they adapt. Okay. And so you address that injustice, even as you're addressing adaptation. But loss and damage is an extreme situation whereby impacts that are beyond us occur. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We are getting closer to the end of our presentation, our panel. There's an interesting question down there, but it's beyond my reach. So I hope that most of the issues that we've discussed so far might have addressed the person who posted the question. Now, to get closer to our last question, I did like us to engage the panel. Oh, so you have a, okay. We'll have a last, I'll take a last question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to thank our panelists for that insightful discussions on the Koronivia process. So for me, I think what is important as far as the first question is concerned is that I think there was kind of a work program that was developed, and then it has a focus that it seeks to address, and that is to ensure that the agricultural sector is actually transformed. But when you look at this discussion now, we are looking at, we are trying to relate the work program to, justice. So I don't want to be, subjective in this case. But I think when we want to actually look at justice and trying to connect it to this, what I want us to look at is the fact that, least developed countries are actually having a series of challenges when it comes to, meeting food production, like the demands of their population. So when we want to link that to justice, and looking at the first question, I don't believe that, much progress has been made so far. So developing a document is just one thing, but when it comes to implementation, that is also one thing that we need to actually focus on. because you can have, good laws, but how are those laws, being enforced in a particular country? So the same thing applies to, the work program. You can have a very good, strategy, but how far are you, implementing what is in the strategy? So as far as progress is concerned, and then trying to link into justice, I don't think much has been, registered. Because you see, least developed countries are always talking about, they are always negotiating on finance, on how to boost their agricultural sector. So for me, I don't think much has been registered, and I think there is much to be done as far as this Koronivia work program on agriculture is concerned, because a lot of funding is required for developing countries to actually boost their agricultural production. So basically, that's what I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it goes back to Batra's points our experts made, that implementation, when it comes to implementation, perhaps this is where loss and damage, and then the discussion. So I think the policies in the UNFCCC process need to talk to each other, because then we have Koronivia as a policy, but when it comes to implementation, then we know that some countries will not be able to implement certain food system policies or measures and so on. So this is where loss and damage, the mechanism on loss and damage, ought to start filling the gaps for these countries. And then, of course, so I think all these issues are really interesting. And we are about to wrap up our session. But before I allow my senior expert to take their seat, we want to also... I've gone back. Okay, so please, this is a question for my audience online and then audience here. What is one thing that you will take away from this event? What is that one thing? What is that one thing that you would like to take away from this event? Before I come to our panelists, we want to see the responses popping up. One participant typing. The Wi-Fi is not working. Oh, okay. Okay. But then it's a question for you to reflect on. Okay. No, we want to hear.
No, I'm just saying one thing I take away from the event is that we have some strong negotiators here. Thank you.
Let's go. Okay, so someone says people should not dictate what type of farming others do in different parts of the world. That's one thing, one takeaway. Okay, so because the internet is not working, we will not dwell so much on it. Or you want to say something as well?
So that they can able to do their farming as they want. My sister actually said.
Yeah, empowerment, so that women and other gender groups can do their farming as they want. Okay, any other person in the audience? I see you smiling. It's as if you have something to say. Okay.
Thank you. This was great. I'm learning a lot, and I'm just grateful to be here and be part of the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in the last remarks, I'd love to hear the opinion of one person on establishing mitigation standards for agricultural production. I just would like to know what you think about it. Or one person. I'm sorry. I know we're in the end of the event.
Okay, so for our last panelist, also I have a takeaway question for you. So, what steps are needed to promote just transformation in agriculture? It can be one word or a sentence, or you can elaborate. We are closing. So I start with Madam Veronica. What steps? How should we take our step in implementing justice? If it's about the Koronivia or even in our nationally determined contribution or in agriculture framework.
I think what is required is an analysis of the issues that we are considering as injustices and justices in different circumstances so that we can be able then to address them.
Thank you.
So what I'll say that's two things. One is that agriculture is a contributor to climate change, as well as the greatest means to adapt to climate change. So as the question you asked is very tricky. Yes, we need a mechanism, but it has to be again, any kind of such work program has to be designed in a way that it delivers justice to the different parts of the world. It cannot be the same solution for the different kind of people, different kind of groups. That's one. Number two is in terms of agricultural transformation, just transformation. One thing I would suggest that land reform, I mean land right reform, all over the world. I mean so that women and indigenous group have the land rights. Like globally, it's like 15% of the land is only owned by women. And a country like Bangladesh, where I work for CARE, is only 4%. So I don't know, it's even worse than yours, I'm not sure. Only 4%. So this is one area we really need to work on. Otherwise, we cannot, ensure the rights of indigenous groups, women, and other gender groups, as you said.
Okay, thank you for the response.
Thank you very much. I think one thing I have learned from almost everyone here is that there are some really hierarchical societies where men are really still dominating the discussions or everything around agriculture. However, what I think would be progressive towards a just society would be collaboration. Collaboration in the sense that whatever we do should be informed by empirical scientific investigations. And in doing so, what we are doing here is you're really looking at what we are doing, and then others are doing other researches, and that should inform what justice would mean, knowing fully well that there is no homogeneity of all these complexities around the world. What exists here might be completely different in another society. So all of us collaborating in one way or another would help us to achieve the desired goals of getting to a just transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. My word is justice and publicity.
Oh.
Sorry to say, if women, even if we are dumb and deaf, when we start making noise, people will come to our aid.
Okay.
And then justice will take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For me, it comes down to committed people represented here, working together to foster an unstoppable movement leading to that transformative adaptation, which, as you pointed out again, Rebecca, justice is absolutely core to transformative adaptation. So the two go together. So we work together to bring about that change. And it might be a tough, bumpy road, but we persevere.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for participating in our panel session. I did like to use the opportunity to thank my experts for taking their time. You can imagine the time, 6:30, 7:30. We should have been on our way back, but you spend the time to share your knowledge with us. It is really important, and we appreciate it. I did like to thank colleagues in the University of Leeds, in CGIAR, and CARE International, Kenya Ministry of Agriculture, the Tuba Women Association, the University of Gambia, the CGIAR, and all family and communities out there watching us. We are grateful. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank 3 of my colleagues who have been very helpful. This panel session wouldn't have been successful without them. Sean, Sabrina, and Lina, thank you very much. Please clap for everyone here and clap for them as well. Thank you very much. We have refreshments outside, and then let's take something, drink, and then chat before we go home. Thank you.